good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for attending what is our 8th virtual Naperville Business Network meeting. My name is Rhonda Seelinger, and I am the Marketing Director for our networking groups. And before we get started, I would just like to share a little bit of information about our groups. In 2008, the founders created 5 groups on LinkedIn and trademarked their names. They are the Naperville, Northwest, North Shore, Oak Brook, and Windy City Business Networks. The Naperville Business Network grew to become the largest online LinkedIn group for Naperville with over 2,000 people, and we have over 200 paid members. We normally meet in person the first Thursday of each month at the Naperville City Hall building, and we always have a guest speaker. However, for the remainder of this year and probably into the early months of 2021, we'll continue to be virtual on Zoom until it's safe for all of us to be together again. We also typically hold monthly happy hour events and quarterly formal dinners for our paid members. And we're hoping and looking forward to the day that those will resume, hopefully early next spring. We'll keep everyone posted on that. Until then, we do offer our paid members more digital advertising options, and look forward to, again, just being back in person when we can do so safely. To learn more about our groups, future events, or membership, you can visit our website at naperbiz.net. That's NAPERBIZ.net. And today's meeting is being recorded and made available on our website blog page, also at naperbiz.net. And we also make it available on our social media pages. So we would love to have you follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat box, or on Facebook Live, you can use the comment section, and we will moderate as appropriate. And with that covered, I am very pleased to welcome today's guest speaker, Beckie Hayes. Beckie is the founder of Mercob Consulting Group, I hope I got that right, Incorporated, and is passionate about helping privately held business owners get more of what they want from their businesses. Additionally, Beckie serves as a Chicago director for the American Club Association, the vice chairman of the board for Chambers 630, and facilitates a family business roundtable for family businesses in the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Beckie, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rhonda, and I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to Naperville Network for just the opportunity to share with the group today. Just also like to say thank you to each of you that are logging in. Really appreciate you taking some time this morning. So with that, just jump on in. There's really a couple of objectives that I'd love to accomplish today in our time together, just to make sure that this is an effective use of your time. And so what those are is, number one, would love to just help give you a new lens to be able to look at your business through. And then secondly, just introduce you to a couple of simple, practical, immediately usable tools that are going to help you get more from your business. So with that, just in the context of all of that, I'd love to ask you a quick question as we're starting out here. The question is, what do you want from your business? And the kind of framework around that is, number one, it needs to be at least 5 years out. And number two, just one thing, not 20 things, one thing. And if you've got a sheet of paper in front of you, I'd suggest just jotting that down. And as you're pondering through that, I'm going to just transition in and share a little bit with you about why I do the work that I do and where the passion that I have comes from. So just to give a little bit of a background, I was born into an entrepreneurial family. My dad ran a business from our house through most of my childhood. I had a grandfather, a number of uncles that were also entrepreneurs. So from a very young age, I began to make an observation. Some people were getting what they wanted from their business. They were lighthearted, enjoyed what they did. They had time to do other things, and other people struggled in their business. And so I couldn't have articulated it at the time, but I began to wonder why. Why are some people getting what they want? Why are some people more stressed and not getting what they want? And as I pondered that question, I was the first one in my family to graduate from college, started out on my own career, and I started working in small and mid-sized entrepreneurial businesses. That question continued to surface along the way. More recently had been managing a engineering staffing firm. We serviced the energy sector, doing a lot of work in support of nuclear power plants and wind farm construction projects. We got the ability to go on a good growth journey. We went from 6 million to 25 million over the 9 years that I was there. And while I was there, we bumped into a book called Traction. Basically lays out a concept called the entrepreneurial operating system. And we began to implement these tools in that organization. And it just transformed the way that we managed the business. But personally, it did something deeper. It helped me answer a lot of the questions as to why some businesses are getting what they want and some aren't. And so what I want to do today is just give you an introduction to an idea of what are these things that these business owners are doing to get what they want. And in order to do that, I just want to paint the context for you around some of the most common frustrations that I see in working with leadership teams to help them get what they want. About 4.5 years ago, I set out to start my own business. I got formally trained in helping other business owners implement the EOS system within their organizations. And so I spend all of my time working with the heads of organizations, typically somewhere in the $4 million to $50 million range, helping them implement these tools to strengthen their business. So what are these frustrations that I'm seeing consistently, and what are we doing to help counter those frustrations? So my ask is, if you write anything down, if you only write one thing down, don't leave only having these frustrations on your sheet of paper, but I do want to paint the picture of what they are just to help you grasp, and my guess is probably resonate a fair amount with some of what I'll share. So number one is control and lack of it, to be clear. Oftentimes what I'm seeing is leaders are feeling as though the business is running them more than them running their business. They're stuck in the weeds of the business instead of being focused on the business. Profit. Oftentimes they're feeling as though they should be getting more profit for all the energy, effort, blood, sweat, and tears that they're pouring into their business. They're probably looking around at other companies in their sector and seeing them get a better return on their profit, and they're wondering, why am I not getting what I believe I should be getting from a profit standpoint? People. This is probably one of the most common frustrations I bump into. There's all sorts of people challenges that I encounter in working with leadership teams. Sometimes it's at the leadership team level. Really strong leaders, funnily enough, they don't always work together as a healthy, functional, and cohesive leadership team. Sometimes it's employees that there's a frustration around a lack of accountability. I see a lot of that with these remote workforces, and just having to ask people over and over again. Sometimes it's vendors, misunderstandings, or with customers of just not seeing things on the same wavelength. Fourth would be a concept I call hitting the ceiling. So frequently in the growth of a business, it's not a straight line. You grow, 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 and then you bump into this ceiling. Sometimes that's from a revenue standpoint. Sometimes it's from a time allocation standpoint. But what I find is, if you implement some simple tools, it will help you break through those ceilings that you typically will encounter in the growth of your business. And then last, just the feeling that nothing's working. Oftentimes, business owners, CEOs are part of peer advisory groups. They get some great ideas month-end meetings, and then they come back and begin to put those into place in the organization. But they often peter off after the first month or 2 months, and the team begins to kind of have this, oh no, it's another flavor of the month sort of deal. This is going to fall to the wayside as well. And so it's the feeling that we're trying all these different things, but we're still not getting the results that we're looking for. So with that, the reason I give you those frustrations, because it helps to paint a context. So what I want to do now is just give you a glimpse of, if you envision your company at the center of this model I'm going to share with you, it's going to help you understand how to go about counteracting those frustrations that I see, and my guess is you've probably experienced in the day-to-day growth of your organization. And so with that, I'm going to go through the model once and just give you a high-level overview. And then when I go back through the second time, I'm going to drill down and introduce a couple of simple tools that you can begin to implement as you go through this journey. One thing I want to highlight is there's going to be a lot of information that I share here today. My ask is, if you could just draw out maybe 1 or 2 different things that really speak to you and begin to put those into place in your organization starting this afternoon, you will seek results. So try not to take everything in and begin to go implement it, but if you can at least take 1 or 2 things, you're going to end up seeing value. So in the context of all of this and painting the picture of what the end looks like in the organizations that I work with, of becoming strong in what I call 6 key components of your business, the first component is what I call the vision component. And I find it's not typically that organizations don't have a vision. They normally do. The challenge is there's typically just different variations of what that vision is. If I were to take each one of the leaders out of an organization, the CFO, the head of sales, the head of operations, and the president, and just say, what's your vision? I tend to get multiple variations of a similar concept of a vision. So the journey here is to get that leadership team on the same page with what that vision is. Secondly is people. You can't accomplish that vision without the right people in the organization. And so when we come back through in just a minute, I'm going to paint the picture to help you define how you know if you have the right people in your organization. Third would be, once you've got the clear vision and you've got the people in the organization to help you accomplish that vision, it's ultimately defining what the right numbers are in your organization to move it from more of a gut feel in running your business to actually get tangible numbers that you're running the business by. And so with that, what I find is when that vision is clear, you've got the right people and you've learned how to deal with the people issues that arise, and you're managing the business based on numbers, inevitably what happens is you're creating this open, honest, transparent organization. And what happens in that, you start to have these issues that begin to surface. We believe that's a good thing. And ultimately, those issues are there in the organization, whether you realize it or not. But those are the things that are going to stand in the way of your ability to accomplish your vision. And so the next component then is what we call the vision or the issues component. So the issues component is ultimately just getting laser focused clarity on what the challenges you're facing as an organization, and brings you on the journey of solving those to ultimately help you accomplish your vision. We find that successful people are just really good at root cause issue solving in their organizations. The next component then is what we call the process component. And this is where you're bringing some simplicity and consistency to the organization. If you think about walking into a McDonald's, regardless of which one it is, or I guess it's probably a drive-through at this point, but whichever McDonald's it is, you're going to have a consistent level of an experience that you go through. And what we're trying to do is get to the point where you've got a consistent process that you're delivering your product or your service to your client base. And then finally is what we call the traction component. We believe that vision without traction is hallucination. And so what do I mean by that? A lot of organizations do a lot of great work around defining their vision. Often what they're lacking is the framework and the tools that need to be in place in order to execute that vision. And that's really the unique aspect of the work that I get to do, is help teams strengthen those disciplines that help consistently drive that vision forward, long-term, short-term, and really each quarter, each month, and each week as they're growing their organization. So with that in mind, when I'm leading a team through this journey, it is a journey. Everybody's got a different starting point as far as how strong they are in these different components. The journey I take them on is wherever their starting point is. If it's 20% strong in one of these components, ultimately bringing them to 80% strong or better in all of these different components. And just to be clear, the companies that I'm working with, they're growing businesses, they're doing well, they're succeeding in spite of the fact that they might be weak in some of these components. And so what happens is, as they strengthen those components, they begin to go from a reactive mode of responding to whatever issues surfaces, ultimately to a proactive mode, preventing many of those issues from surfacing in the first place. So with that, as I mentioned, I want to go back through each of these components now and just introduce you to a couple of tools under each component to help get clarity around how you can begin to implement some of these things in your organization. So again, when I talk about this vision component, the vision component is simply starting at the leadership team level, everybody laser focused, clear on what the vision of the organization is. And so there's a lot of definitions of the word vision. The way we define what a vision is simply by asking and answering as a leadership team 8 simple questions. And to the extent that I can get that leadership team 100% on the same page with the answers to these questions, they've then got a clear vision with alignment at the leadership team level. They can then begin to take to the rest of the organization. So your question is probably, what are these 8 questions? So just to run through them, and then I'm going to drill down into each one of them a bit further, but just to kind of give you an overview, it's the core values of the organization, the core focus, the 10-year target, the marketing strategy for the company, the 3-year picture, the 1-year plan, and then quarterly rocks, and then ultimately the issues of the organization. And so these 8 questions, the answers to these 8 questions are what make up the vision of that organization. So there's a simple 2-page document that we work with teams to get clarity on. And you'll notice there's shaded sections. There's 2 pages to this, and I'll show you both of them. But these shaded areas, there's 8 of them, they align with these 8 questions. So starting up at the top, the core values of an organization are really what come from the core of the leadership team. And it's what makes up really the personality or the culture of the organization. Our recommendation is around 3 to 5 core values. And when we talk about the people component in just a minute, I'll actually show you how to take those core values and begin to actually implement them throughout the entire organization. So it's not just an exercise of saying, yeah, here's what these are, and throwing them on a wall somewhere. It's important that you get to the point where you're actually really hiring, managing, promoting, and when necessary, firing based on those core values. The second then section there, the next one down, is called the core focus. And this is really the combination of either a purpose or cause or a passion, the why behind what you do, and your niche, the sweet spot where you're providing the most value in that area of the business world when you're functioning in that sweet spot. And what we find is this helps you to keep laser focus and guard against what we call shiny object syndrome. When something new arises, and especially if it's the founder or the visionary of the organization wants to go run after that, and it's outside of the realm of the sweet spot of the organization, the core focus helps to rein that in a fair amount. The third section there you can see in the middle is what we call a 10-year target. And the whole idea here is when you look longer term out in the organization, we call it 10-year. Some of my clients use 10 years, some of them use 5 years, especially the high growth companies. The long term is where are we big picture going as an organization? Most founders, many leaders know it in their head, they feel it in their heart, they see it. The challenge is as you go further down the organization, they don't hear it, they don't see it, they may have never even heard you articulate it. So getting laser focused clarity around what it is, and then making sure the leaders are aligned around it. And I've seen it with teams where one person wants to quadruple the revenue, another one is happy with the status of where the revenue is at. They just want to simplify their balance between work and home life. So as you can imagine, if that's the decisions, if that's the long term for each of them, neither one is wrong, but they're extremely different. And every decision that they make is going to be moving them one step closer to the accomplishment of that longer term target. And that's why alignment is essential. With that, the bottom section there is what we call the marketing strategy. There's 4 components to what makes up that marketing strategy. The first one is what we call the target market, or the list, if you will. And this is the idea if you were to create a database and spit out all of your ideal prospects, the type of customers that you love doing business with and you're profitable when you do that business, what would that look like from a demographic, geographic, and psychographic standpoint? The second part of marketing strategy is then what we call the 3 uniques. Some people will use the term differentiators. The combination of these 3 different elements are ultimately that what make you different from everybody else that do the same thing that you do in the marketplace. And this is ultimately the message then, that when you've got the right list of people that your sales and marketing team are going after, and you're communicating consistently what your 3 uniques are, you then know ultimately when you see them, what you're going to say to them, and ultimately some of the pain points that they're feeling that you're there to help address along the journey. The third part then of marketing strategy is what we call the proven process. And this is typically a visual document with different bullet points delineating the journey that you're bringing your customer through from the first time you have a conversation with them, ultimately through continuing that relationship to keep them happy and ultimately a customer forever. The final part then to the marketing strategy is what we call the guarantee. So guarantee consists of, it might be, as an example, the guarantee I provide to my clients is 100% guarantee satisfaction, meaning if we do a full day session together as a leadership team and you don't get the value that you feel like I promised you, you simply don't pay me. So it's defining how do you mitigate any hesitations or risks that your prospect might be feeling when they're making the decision of moving forward to work with you. So with that, then transitioning over to the right side of this first page, the vision page of the document, you'll see what we call the 3-year picture. So you've defined that 10-year longer term. The 3-year picture then makes up getting a bit more detail as far as what the organization is going to look like 3 short years from now. So with that, it's got a future date, your revenue, your profit, and different measurables or different dynamics of measuring what that looks like and translating it into terms that the folks in your organization can really resonate with. So for a client of mine that's a manufacturer, it's, how many widgets would that translate into? And that's oftentimes something that the employees, when they look at it, they're like, whoa, they may gloss over when they hear revenue and profit if that's not something they're familiar with. But when you delineate the measurables, they're really getting a feel and tasting the size and growth of what you're talking about in this next 3 years. From there, it's painting a picture of what does this 3-year picture ultimately look like. It may be launching some new products or service lines. It might be opening multiple work locations. It might be going international as far as providing your products and your services. It's helping to create a picture. Going back to the idea that I find, especially founders, but often leaders of organizations, they understand and they feel and they see in their heart what this 3 years looks like. Often, again, they've never articulated it, and definitely I find most of the time they've not articulated it in a way that the whole organization can begin to align around the accomplishment of that 3-year picture. There was a graduate school study done. The way it worked is they had 2 people across the table from each other. One person got a list of different songs and they kept it hidden, and their job was to tap out using a pencil what that song was. And so they were singing it kind of in their head and tapping it along. And then the person on the other side's job was to guess what song it was they were tapping. And out of that journey, I think there was 100 or so out of 100 different ones, 2 or 3 of them got the song right. And this just paints the picture of what really goes on in the organization is the leaders see it in their head, they feel it in their heart, they know where they're going, but the rest of the organization is those other 97 people that got that song wrong. They're not seeing it, they're not hearing it, they don't understand where we're going, and that helps to make them wonder, why am I doing the work that I'm doing day in and day out? As you get clear on that 10-year and that 3-year, and then bring it down to the ground to help see what is each employee's role in helping to accomplish that, that's really where they start to get the fulfillment and the value out of whatever work that it is that they're doing, whether that's answering a phone every day, whether it's producing a widget. It's not only doing that, they're tying it down to the bigger picture and even to the core focus or the why behind why and how you're impacting the organization, the client base, and ultimately the bigger picture around the world. I find a lot of millennials are really looking for wanting to have that real change or impact in the culture. I think that's a precious thing, in that when you're clear about your 10-year and your 3-year and your core focus, this actually helps to accomplish that longing that really all generations have, but that millennials have done a great job of articulating. So with all of that, that is the first page of this 2-page document I call the Vision Traction Organizer. We call this first page the vision page. Moving along, then the second page is ultimately what we call the traction page. So once you've defined that 10-year and that 3-year, we're bringing it down even more to the ground and making it a reality and saying, if that's true, if we've got that clear 3-year picture, what has to happen in these next 12 months to make sure that we're 33% closer to accomplishing that 3-year plan? Or that 3-year picture. So with that, you'll see a little bit more detail here. The 1-year plan consists of, again, a future date, the revenue, the profit, the measurables. But then you'll see extra column down there. And this is where you're getting laser focused clarity around the goals for the organization. Now, this is the 3 to 7 most important priorities. It's not 127 priorities. It's the 3 to 7. Less is more here. And it's helping, again, to bring alignment to the organization when an employee is deciding how they're allocating their time when they've got multiple things coming at them. They're bringing it back to, oh, wait, this is part of the goal for the year. That's important. I'm going to start there.
Beckie, I'm not seeing that second page. Sorry, there you go. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Okay, perfect. So that's the whole idea of the 1 year, is just getting laser focused clarity of the most important priorities for the organization. So with that, then going to the middle column, once you've defined the 1 year, what we call rocks are merely priorities for the next 90 days for you as a leadership team, for the organization, and then ultimately individually as well. And this is just, again, bringing it next level down to the ground. If you're going to accomplish that 1 year plan and that 3 year picture, what are the most important priorities for you as a leader to do in this next 90 days? And so again, there's a future date, a revenue, the profit, the measurables, but then it's defining what we call rocks, the 3 to 7 most important priorities. And then you'll see an extra column there, who. Now this is key, because if you just throw priorities out there, but nobody's accountable for them, my experience with teams are, it doesn't get done, and you get this kind of finger pointing. I thought they were going to do it. I thought they were going to do it. This is putting one person's name. So you've got one set of eyes. Did you do it or did you not? Bringing a level of accountability, starting at the leadership team, but then ultimately throughout the entire organization. And then the column on the right is what we call the long-term issues list. And these are any obstacles, barriers, sometimes opportunities, but it's typically things that may stand in the way of you ultimately accomplishing everything else that we've defined here in this vision traction organizer. What we find is when you place the long-term issues here, you can free up your brain not to think about them. When I work with a team during a quarterly planning meeting, we spend a couple of hours in the afternoon of those meetings doing this root cause issue solving of those bigger picture, longer term issues. So the 2 of those pages are then, again, what we call this vision traction organizer, and the 8 questions we've answered, the shaded sections, are what we define as the vision of the organization. Now, it's not enough just to do one of these great offsite vision building days and answer those questions, and even to get alignment. That's important. But unless we do this next piece of getting it shared by all, it's a waste of a lot of time, energy, and effort. And I see this quite frequently. I'll go into the owner's office. They'll pull out a binder from last year that has dust on it. It's about this thick. That's their vision of what they're wanting to accomplish. But yet nobody else on the leadership team or in the organization has ever looked at it. And frankly, oftentimes the owners only look at it the initial week or month after they do it, and then it gathers dust. And so 100% of this vision component is where the whole leadership team is aligned around the answers to those 8 questions, and the whole organization shares that vision. Now, once you've done that, that's great, but you can't accomplish that vision without having the right people in your organization. So when I talk about right people, Jim Collins made this term really popular in his book, Good to Great. It's talking about getting the right people in the right seats on the bus. We find going a step further and helping people articulate what that truly means and how they can discern whether or not it's the right people is really essential. And so when I talk about the right people, we did all that great work in that vision traction organizer around defining what the core values of the organization are. This is the place where we begin to bring those core values to life. So the right people are the people that share those core values in your organization. And there's a simple tool that we use. It's called the People Analyzer. And the way it works is you can see across the top, there's a listing of core values. These are the core values for EOS worldwide. So these are just an example. You would put your own core values as an organization on the top of this tool. But you see there, humbly confident, grow or die, help first, do the right thing, do what you say you're going to do. You then list out the names of the different employees on the left-hand side, and then you go to work at just assessing how they're doing in each one of these different core values. There's 3 rating options. Plus is most of the time they do it. Everybody's a human, nobody's perfect, but the majority of the time they exhibit that core value. Second option for assessing would be a minus. You can see John Smith there has minuses straight across for every single core value. Minus means the majority of the time, rarely, if ever, do they exhibit that core value. And then the final rating option is a plus minus, meaning, well, it's inconsistent. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So what that you'll see across the bottom then is what we call the bar. So if you've got 5 core values like this example here, our strong recommendation would be this is what the bar is the minimum acceptable assessment within the organization. And so the bar in this example, we would recommend 3 pluses and 2 plus minuses. You'll notice no negatives as being part of that. Now, this is a really powerful tool. It's very simple, but it's powerful. And I've seen it time and time again. When I'm working with the leadership team doing an offsite meeting, we're going through a journey and inevitably someone's name keeps popping up through the course of our day together. So that's the point where I just say, pause. I've heard Joe's name like 5 times so far. Let's just pull out the people analyzer and let's figure out what's going on here. So this is the core values side of the document to assess whether or not he's exhibiting the core values. The other side of that, though, is it's not enough. As a growing entrepreneurial business, you can't hire people only based on core values. You don't have the time and the capacity to bring people up to speed in training. And so we find the other element is what we call the right seats. The right seat means they actually have the right skill set to do the job and do it well. So the tool we use here is what we call the accountability chart. Now, we don't use the term organizational chart, and we're very intentional about that. The reason why is we find organizational charts tend to promote ego. They're based on title and how many people you have reporting to you. In the accountability chart, instead, we're defining the right structure for the organization. We're defining who owns accountability in the organization. And again, bringing it back to one set of eyes we can look at when something goes wrong in the organization. And we find every organization has some sort of sales and marketing function, some sort of operations functions, maybe multiple, some sort of finance function, and it might break out further into HR or IT. What I do is go to work at helping a team to customize the right and best structure for them, looking forward to grow that organization. Now, a unique realization that we've had along the way is really that every great organization in a growing company has this unique role we call that integrator. You'll see it in the center of the page there. This integrator is the person that seamlessly integrates all these major functions of the organization. They're the glue that holds the organization together. They tend to be very detail-oriented. They tend to be really great at communicating expectations. They tend to be really great at having the difficult conversations of holding people accountable when they're not meeting expectations. They're often the behind the scenes person. They're not typically the forefront face of the company, but they really are the ones that are bringing that vision into reality. Now, 50% of the organizations I work with look just like that. Clear integrator in place, and then they've got the major functions delineated throughout the rest of the organization. The other 50% have this additional role that we call a visionary. A visionary and an integrator could not be more different. A visionary is a big picture, big idea, external relationships, passionate about culture. And they're often the founder of the organization, not always. But what's important is if you have a visionary in your organization, it's extra important to get laser focused clarity of what's that visionary accountable for and what's that integrator accountable for, so that you're bringing understanding to the rest of the organization and making sure that there's alignment between those two unique roles.
Becky, do you see some organizations have the same person in multiple seats? Or
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I would say in the majority of growing businesses, you absolutely have multiple seats that you're sitting in. Now, our rule of thumb is one person can sit in multiple seats. You cannot have 2 people in one seat, because again, when that happens, that's where the finger pointing takes place. So when we customize the accountability chart, we then define the roles, and then we say who is owning the accountability in that role. To your point, Rhonda, that's where all of a sudden, and I see this all the time in the session room, usually it's with the founder, they're like, oh, I'm in 6 seats. That's why I'm exhausted. And then we go to work at defining, okay, which one of those do you like doing the least? which one are you not that good at? And who could you potentially be paying less money to do a better job at it? Is there an opportunity to outsource that potentially? Where could you get some things off your plate to help you delegate and elevate to what your unique abilities are and that you bring to the table that nobody else can in the organization? So that's a great question. When we've done that, we've got the right structure. The next step we take teams on is defining the 5 major roles for each of these different seats that we've defined. And so with that, it's, you know, if it's maybe the operations seat or, that we're talking about here, we take a structure first, people second approach, meaning we're defining the right structure to get the company where it needs to go. When I'm working with the team, I'm saying, hey, don't even assume you've got a seat in the organization. We're taking a board of directors look. What's the right structure to get you where you need to be in the next 6 to 12 months? What are the 5 major roles? Who are you going to be holding accountable? What process might you own? Whatever those 5 major roles are. And then we go to work at asking the questions on the left-hand side of the screen is, once you've defined those 5 major roles, then we bring the people component back in and say, is there anybody in the organization that gets it? Meaning the God-given gift to do the job, to do it well. They want it, meaning they jump out of bed excited about doing that job, and then the capacity to do it. So capacity is seamlessly the background, the training, and the experience to be able to do that job and to do it well. And so with that, going back to what we call the people analyzer, you'll see now 3 additional columns on that right-hand side: the get it, the want it, and the capacity columns. This one simple tool, the people analyzer, helps you on the left-hand side define whether or not the employee is the right person. On the right-hand side shows you, are they in the right seat? And you'll see down at the bottom, the options of how you would rate the get it, want it capacity are a simple black and white yes or no. And it's regarding the 5 major roles of the seat that you're looking at assessing them for. So what I find then, going back to my example about this guy named Joe in the session room that keeps getting talked about, I pull out the people analyzer and I just have the team go through and rate core value, each one we go through, and then the get it, want it capacity. And inevitably what I find is when they dial in and they drill down, they're now able to articulate there's 1 core value that this person is consistently not exhibiting, or maybe 5 core values that they're not exhibiting. Or that helps you understand, is it more of a core values issue? Or if it's, they just don't really get it. We've explained it 20 million times, but it's not sinking in, or they're just simply not showing up wanting to do the work that we've agreed that they're accountable for. Or maybe I've told them over and I've trained them and I've tried to bring them up to speed, but they simply don't have the capacity to be able to do the job. Once you've defined that, this is an amazing, really training and development tool for leaders to use with their teams, because this is then the conversation that you inevitably want to have with your employee. What I find when I do that exercise with the team in our offsite meetings with the leadership team, I simply ask the question, has anybody ever communicated to Joe that he's not meeting your expectations? And so often what I hear is, well, no. I'm like, is that fair to Joe? For you to have these frustrations, keep talking about him, but nobody's done the honor and respectful thing of actually dialoguing with Joe and saying, hey, Joe, I want to be open and honest with you. These core values are essential to who we are as an organization. And I'm concerned because this one here, I'm not sure if you realize it or not, but here's 3 examples where you've not been exhibiting that core value. So as your leader, as your manager, let's come up with a game plan, how to strengthen the way that you're coming across in that way. And so it really becomes a teaching or training opportunity. And it works the same way on the get it, want it capacity. That being said, you've had these conversations kind of informally. At some point, if you're not seeing changes, you know, obviously you'd work with your HR or legal department, but you'd ultimately need to move towards having that kind of 3-step conversation of, this isn't looking good. Core values are important. I'm not seeing them. I need something to change. I'm going to meet with you again next week, and I need to have seen change happen. I find when you do that kind of conversation well, inevitably what happens is the person ends up exiting the organization because they see the writing on the wall, and they typically aren't happy in a role that they're not a good fit for, or in a culture where they don't share the core values. And so this is one of the most powerful tools that teams end up using, and it's an amazing just takeaway to help hone in on where an employee is struggling as far as either core values, so being in the right person or being in the right seat. So the rest of this is going to move a little bit faster. I do spend a little bit more time on the vision and the people component because I find those are some of the most common components that companies are struggling with. So you now have a clear vision. The whole company shares it. You've got the right people in the right seats. The data component then is moving from the kind of gut feel of managing the organization. And to be honest, most entrepreneurs do a great job at growing their business based on gut feels. What happens is you continue to grow as an organization, you build in more levels of accountability or management, they don't always know or share those same gut feels. And this is where you're actually documenting what data you're going to be managing the business by. So starting with what we call the scorecard. The scorecard is a high-level instrument. It's intended for the leadership team. And this is the 5 to 15 numbers at a high level that you're using to assess the leading indicators of the behaviors that are necessary to get the results ultimately that you need. So just as an example here, you see the column on the left is who. Once again, we're building in accountability. If there's not a name attached to it, my experience is typically it's not going to get done. It's defining what that measurable is, and then defining what the weekly goal is for that measurable. And then it's simply 13 weeks at a glance. I have my clients color code those numbers each week based on a judgment against the goal. And green means they hit the goal. Yellow means they were close but didn't hit it. And red simply means we didn't hit it. And that's an idea of a concern.
Advance your slide. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think you need to advance your slide. I'm seeing the data pie, not the, there you go.
Okay, seems to be a little delay, so thank you for letting me know.
Oh, thank you, sorry.
That's okay. So ultimately, it's at a one glance, you can glance down and see the color coding as to whether or not you're on track to assess how you're going to do at the end of the week, at the end of the month, and the end of the quarter. And this gives you a chance to actually take action before you get those results at month end or at quarter end. So here's just a list of a handful of different measurables that may find themselves on your scorecard. But what I do, I customize with the team what the right numbers should be on their scorecard. Because even if you have companies with in the same industry, I find their scorecards are going to look different. So it's getting the right numbers for them to really fall in love with that are giving them the gauge on how to manage their business proactively. The second then tool under the data component is what we call a measurable. And this is simply getting to the point where everybody in the organization has some sort of number that defines what success looks like in their role. Everybody from, the sales team, which I think for most people, success is pretty clear as far as measurables for them, but even to the idea of a payroll person, it might be 0 errors. Everybody knows the impact that a payroll error has on the employee morale in an organization. So it's getting everybody with a clear picture of what success looks like. Now, I find 100% in this component is where not just the leadership team, but every department in the organization has some sort of scorecard, ultimately bringing it down to the numbers or the measurables that each employee is accountable for. And what I've been hearing consistently from my clients is they're so glad that they've defined these numbers. When they've got employees working off site, there's a clear picture of what success looks like in those roles and whether or not people have accomplished them. This enables them to provide a level of flexibility for folks that might be, juggling helping the kids working their schoolwork remotely and their job. And it's helping to define if they're accomplishing these measurables, that is what success looks like in that role. So again, when I talk about that crystal clear vision, you've got the right people in the right seats. You now have numbers that are defining that those are the right people in the right seats. Again, we're talking about an open, transparent, honest organization. There is no place to hide. So this is all about bringing that level of accountability to the organization. And inevitably what happens then is issues start to arise. And again, this is a good thing because the issues are there, whether you see them or not. We're smoking them out, doing a great job of just identifying what those issues are. So with that, it's a shift oftentimes even in a mindset to help with the leadership team to say, actually, we are encouraging you to call out issues. So everywhere in the organization, if there's an issue, we want to know about it. Now, this isn't just to vent and complain. It's just getting to the point where when sales sells something and operations can't deliver it, and those operations folks or customer service people are feeling frustrated, we want to know about that so that we can do some root cause issue solving. The second then component is what we call IDSing. And so this IDS stands for the issue solving track. We found really talented leaders get hit with an issue and they would go straight to that middle component, the discuss component. They would spend hours discussing the issue, actually feel like they were productive because they were talking about it, but seldom did they identify the root cause behind the issue, and very seldom did they come up with the last component, which is the solve, which means you're coming up with some sort of to-do with someone's name attached to it that's going to make that issue go away forever. And so that's what we're leading teams through, is an appropriate type of issue solving. I find most of the times when things land on the issues list, those are symptoms of a deeper cause or a problem. They've got to dig, get down to the root. Frankly, oftentimes it may be one of the components in that model that I showed you. It might be a people issue. It might be a process issue. It might be a data issue. They're not measuring a number. Once they can take a step back and see the root cause behind what's causing it, I find that discussion time shrinks significantly. So instead of 2 hours, the people issue that I talked about with this guy, Joe, they could spend 2 hours venting about Joe. It's not productive. This is the highest paid employees in the organization, spending 2 hours of time talking about Joe. I find you pull the people analyzer out, you run through it in a quick 5 minutes. The discussion then becomes, okay, who does Joe report to? And then you're going to have a conversation with Joe by next week when we meet again. And you're on your way to a step towards a long-term solution of addressing the people issue that's going on in the organization. So 100% in that component is where everybody has some sort of issues list where they can bring the challenges that they're facing and doing their role. And you've taught everybody in the organization how to proactively identify the root cause and come up with solutions. When you've got your whole organization acting in that way, oftentimes the issues never even land on your desk as the owner of the business because you've taught your team well, and they're typically the ones that are most capable of doing that root cause issue solving and coming up with the solution. The process component then is frankly the one that's most neglected in entrepreneurial businesses. And we really just say, take an 80-20 approach to this component. We're not looking for ISO 9000 certification unless that's required within your industry, but we are looking at a high level of what are those core processes in your organization. Let's get them documented. And what are those core processes? We find it typically makes up the people process for how you're bringing people into the organization, training them, getting them up to producing, and then helping to make sure that you're holding them accountable. It's things like your marketing process for how you're generating leads and interest into the organization. And then the sales process for how you're taking those leads and converting them into sales, how you're delivering on those sales that you worked so diligently to get. And ultimately what the accounting process is. So how you're bringing money into the organization, how money goes out. This has been a key component within this interesting year that we've walked through. So oftentimes you've got someone whose desk, their job is to pay bills. So the invoices come in, they see that they owe money, and boom, they immediately write out the check to pay the bill. If you don't have a clearly defined process as far as how you're leveraging the time that you have to pay those bills, then cash flow can become a challenge in this type of environment. And then lastly, what's the customer retention policy? How are you ensuring that you're doing those steps that when you do, it keeps your customers happy and with you forever and not going over to the next competition? So, like I said, document the processes, but that's not enough, because if you do the hard work of documenting them and they're sitting in a drawer somewhere, that's not going to do anybody any good. So the second part of this is followed by all. So you're getting to a point at 100% strong in this component is All those core processes that you've defined are necessary are documented and everybody's following them. So you're creating this franchise prototype in the way that you're delivering your product and your service to your client. What happens with that is kind of when you drive up to the Starbucks drive-through, you're going to get a consistent level of service and a consistent level of product delivered to you, regardless of which barista is doing it. And we're moving towards getting that type of consistency in your company as well. And again, I've heard from many of my clients that this has been key as they've really led their organizations through the pandemic, whether someone had a positive test and someone else had to jump in and take over their role for them, or just getting to the point where they're making sure that they're maximizing, whether it's the cash flow or the production of what they're doing to its fullest capacity. The last and final component then is just simply what I call the traction component. As I mentioned before, that vision defined without some sort of strategic execution plan in place is merely hallucination. And so the traction component consists of what we call rocks, which I referenced from that vision traction organizer. And this again is the 3 to 7 most important priorities for you as a leadership team in your business for the next 90 days. As you go further down the organization, you're going to end up defining what the rocks are for everybody, but there's going to be less. There might be one rock for the rest of the people in the organization, but what you'll find is they're all aligned with what that leader's rocks are and with where you need to be in 90 days, in a year, in 3 years, and in 10 years, so that you've got a steady path in order to make sure that you're going to accomplish what you've committed to the organization you're going to accomplish. The second one is then what I call meetings, and everybody's like, oh, Patrick Lencioni even wrote a book, Death by Meetings. And you know what? Good for people, because they see oftentimes meetings are a waste of time, and they know they could be back at their desk actually producing. That's a real valuable trait that many people have. Here's what we found is having the right meeting pulse and the right agenda for those meetings and some guidelines and rules around those actually make for productive teams. So what does this look like? You know, there's more than 9,000 companies around the world that are running their smaller mid-sized business on this EOS methodology, and every single one of them is using this agenda that I'm about to share with you. It's been tested, it's been proven. We just find it really works when we're disciplined about executing on it. So we start out coming out of the business and into the business with a segue, sharing a quick good news, business and personal, from each leadership team member. You'll notice this is just a quick 5 minutes. It's not a whole weekend recap. It's just helping you to see each other as people and transition into the meeting. Second, you did all that work defining what the scorecard is. This is where every week you as a leadership team, the highest paid employees of the organization, are glancing down to see if your team is doing the leading behaviors necessary for you to stay on track. Again, this is 5 minutes. It's not going through every single number. It's glancing down. Again, I have my clients color code it. So they're glancing down and looking for anything that's red. If there's anything that's red, you don't discuss it here. You would do what I call drop it down to a later part in this meeting where we do actual issue solving. The next one is then what we do is called rock review. So in that offsite 90-day offsite quarterly meeting that I facilitate for my clients, we've defined those 3 to 7 most important priorities for this leadership team. This is where a little tap on the shoulder. Are you on track or are you off track on what you committed to us as your fellow leaders that you're going to accomplish in this 90 days? Again, 5 minutes. This isn't the whole long story of excuses as to why you're not. If there's someone who's off track, this is where you would, again, drop that down to what we call the issues list. The next one then is a place for people headlines. This might be customer or employee headlines. This is a great place as a reminder for leaders to be searching and scouring the organization to assess whether maybe there's an employee that's been really going above and beyond in the core values and maybe would benefit from a quick email from the owner of the business saying thank you. It might be some sort of new contract that you just got with a prospect that you've been pursuing. This is a place to celebrate and really acknowledge and make sure the whole leadership team is aware of what that looks like. Again, this is a quick 5 minutes. Next is what we call a to-do list. And a to-do list is an actively changing element of a weekly meeting. And so what that means is every week you're going to show up and the to-do list is made up of things that you put on there from the previous week's meetings. These are typically the solutions to that IBS process that you went through. It's got what that task was. and it has, again, someone's name attached to it. So when we're reviewing the to-do list here, did you do it or did you not? 5 minutes, no excuses. If they didn't do it, you're dropping that down to this next section that I'm calling the IDS section. So what you'll see is that first part of the meeting, all 5 minutes, all bringing in levels of accountability, but the majority of this 90-minute meeting that a leadership team is having every week, 60 minutes of this meeting is dedicated to having the leaders of the company solve issues from the root. So you've got this issues list that throughout the week they've been populating with all the obstacles, barriers, sometimes opportunities that they've been encountering. Once they've done that, they then take that issues list, they go to work at identifying the 1, 2, and 3 most important things they need to solve that day. They take number 1, they bring it through the IDS process, they identify the root cause, then move to discuss, and then come up with whatever the solve or the solution is, which again, lands itself back on that to-do list for next week's meeting. What the action item is, whose name is attached to it, ensuring the level of accountability that things actually get accomplished. Once you've conquered 1, 2, and 3, you then go to the next 1, 2, and 3 most important. You solve as many issues as time allows. Now, a couple things to be aware of is it's not uncommon that issues aren't finding their way on the issues list. This is what I call an elephant in the middle of the room, and I hand these out to my clients just as a reminder. If there's an issue going on out there and it's not on there, pull out the elephant, call it out, get it on the issues list, and go to work at solving it. The other dynamic I see consistently is what I call tangents. Again, get these signs out to all of my clients and give everybody permission to call each other out on tangents. Because what I find is when they're issue solving, inevitably what happens is 20, 30, 40 other issues start surfacing and they end up on this bunny trail. And it's not the most important thing for them to be solving today. So the way it works is the team calls out a tangent alert, add that to the issues list, but then you train yourself, you discipline yourself to go back to solving the most important issue for that moment, for that business. And so it's brain dump of all the issues, getting those on the issues list, but doing a great job of flexing that prioritization muscle as a team. The final step is then just a quick 5-minute conclude that includes cascading messages, any decisions that were made during the meeting that need to get communicated that would find itself on the to-do list. Who's going to communicate it? How are you going to communicate it? When are you going to communicate it? And then ultimately moving towards any sort of rating for the meeting. So we call this a level 10 meeting agenda because we believe you should be rating this meeting a 10 out of 10. And if you're not, this gives you an opportunity to self-correct as an organization so that 90 minutes that that leadership team is investing is really a strong, effective use of their time solving issues for the organization. And so 100% strong in that traction component is where everybody in the organization has some sort of rock and they're all in some type of meeting pulse. The leadership team is every week, 90 minutes a week. As you go further down the organization, it translates to whatever makes sense. It might be a quick daily huddle. It might be once every other week. It's you defining the right meeting pulse for each of the different teams in your organization. So again, I know I went through a lot of information. My suggestion to you is, of everything that we talked about, all these foundational tools, which one of those spoke to you the most? And my recommendation would be just to begin to go this afternoon and begin to put one of those into place in your organization. So with that, we'd love to just thank you for your time and open it up. We may have time for a couple questions. I will throw out there, if anybody does have an interest in a copy of the book Traction, feel free to reach out to me. I've got my contact information there. I'd be happy to mail you a copy of that. So any questions that you're seeing popping in there, Rhonda?
Yeah, so what size business does the EOS process make the most sense for, would you say?
Sure, it's a great question. I would say really any size business would benefit from reading the book Traction. It's a very help first book. It's taking the tools and putting it into place, even for a one-person business. It really depends on the growth rate of the business. I'd say, when I talk about my target market, it typically ends up being employees, companies with 8 or more employees. Typically it's around 4 million or more in revenue. My sweet spot would probably be somewhere in the, 500 employees or maybe, 50 million in revenue. That being said is, as an example, I've got clients much smaller than that. And I've got clients, one $250 million business, and when they're acquiring companies, they're implementing EOS within each of their acquired companies. So it can definitely work outside of that, but I'd say the pain points or frustrations I clarified is typically in that kind of 4 to 50 million in revenue or so.
Mm-hmm. What I really like about a lot of this is, and that I think works for any size, is just that accountability piece of it. I heard that word a lot, and I do think that that is something that can take businesses off track when nobody's owning a certain process or a certain piece of it. And I know I personally have been through, things like that. And I think that's such an important component to this, regardless of size.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree on that. I actually just finished up a accountability series of videos on LinkedIn or YouTube. Feel free to check those out if you have an interest. I find they're always important in a small business, but I've been finding, especially over the course of this last 9 months, it is a very hot topic. Again, remote workforce, bringing another element of that into the picture, but we can do all sorts of planning, but if there's not an accountability realm around the execution of what we've decided, it's simply not going to work. And frankly, part of my role in working with the leadership team is holding them accountable, because they're defining what's allowable in an organization. And if an owner's not being accountable, that's my role to hold them accountable. But they're basically communicating through their behavior that that's acceptable to the rest of the organization. And that can be a challenge sometimes.
When you were on that first page about the vision, how often should that get looked at or change? Especially like, who would have thought COVID-19 would have happened? And, it seems like that would change a lot of the other things. What I like about this presentation is you do have other things that are shorter term, that maybe that's where you do that. But have you ever seen it where it upends enough to like go to that whole vision thing?
So built into the whole process that I bring a company on every quarter, when we do our full day quarterly meetings, we pull that vision traction organizer out and we drill in and say, is this still right? Do we need to make tweaks and adjustments? When I do a 2-day annual meeting with clients, and then we even go a little deeper, looking and reflecting on the past year and planning for the next year, in addition to the past and future quarters. But every quarter, to your point, it's asking that question, is it still right? Now, just as an example, especially back in March and April with my clients, one of the most common questions I had is, should we change our 1-year goals? And my question to them was, or my comment was, it's an option, but let me ask you another question is, you may not be able to get there the way you thought you could, but what are some other ways that you could get there? And truthfully, I've seen amazing innovation take place and just some real breakthroughs. A number of my clients are literally having their best quarters ever and their best years ever as organizations. And a lot of it's come out of the birth of that innovation that was birthed in the season of constraint, because they wanted not to change that 1 year.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I just love that whole power of innovation. I think for some people, this will be a real stumbling block, but for others who have that desire to find a way, it can really lead to breakthroughs that you wouldn't have maybe had otherwise had everything not kind of went down the way it did. So
yeah, there was a lot of grace for even a little bit of a messy trial at a risk of something new. And maybe it was on their 1-year or 2-year plan to implement. But during that March, April, May season, people are like, I gotta do something. We'll try doing this virtually. And what they realized is, even though the process wasn't completely documented, they went for it, cleaned it up as they went along. And all of a sudden, many of them are looking back and saying, wow, we will never go back to the way we were doing business. This is more efficient, more effective, and more profitable, frankly.
yeah, that's great. Well, listen, we're a little bit over, so thanks for everyone who's held on. And Beckie, thank you so very much for your time and all of this great, really interesting information. Really appreciate your time and professionalism and lots of great content here. So I hope everybody goes on to have a great rest of your day. And with that, I'm going to turn off the meeting. But again, this has been recorded, and we're going to make this available on our social media sites and on the webpage. And we just hope to connect with everyone in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody.